Hey Rob, this is my race assignment where we will be discussing the prologue in chapter 1 of Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, and we will be discussing the MTV documentary of white people and their point of views on everything in America. And we're going to be talking about the new ideas that I personally received from both of those, how I took it into my life personally, and as well as the difficulties in watching it and reading about it, up to finally now putting it together to discuss it. So I thought that the prologue in chapter 1 of the book and the MTV documentary summed up a big issue that is very prevalent in our country, and I think it's a big issue that, no offense, a lot of white people I notice in Vermont and other places have. Like, a big issue is, even if white people aren't racist, being oblivious, I feel, is just as bad, because it may not be adding to the issue of racism itself, but it's not helping it either. And we look at in the book, when in the prologue, when it was being discussed about revising the book and the whole concept of racism, a lot of people that the author talked to asked her, or even surprised that she was redoing the book to make it more relevant, because a lot of people didn't even understand that racism was still relevant when the author realized that. And then when she defined racism, she defined it in such a on point way. Like, racism, in my opinion, is when you systematically oppress a group of people. It's not, a lot of people think racism to be prejudice, and that's how the definition gets misconstrued, and that's why a lot of white people feel attacked by people of color, because of our, in my opinion, valid prejudices. Like, a lot of people of color have a valid prejudice towards white people. Like, can you blame me for not being comfortable in a room full of white people sometimes? Like, historically speaking, that's not a good place for me to be in. So I'm going to have my schema in the back of my head, like, I need to watch myself. That's valid. But most white people will take it as being racist because I am assuming, when most times white people will assume things about me from the way I look to how I speak. And that's simply, in my opinion, a prejudice. It becomes racism when I fail a class instead of a classmate simply because of my race, or a person will treat me differently because of how I look before even getting to know me. That's racism, because you're oppressing me systematically. You're trying to hinder me systematically. A good instance that came to mind when I was reading and watching all this happened at campus. Now, to not, like, blow it out of proportion, I've only had 2 racial instances at Northern Vermont University. Other than that, I love the campus and I love the people, but it's not a safety bubble still. So one of the most blatant instances of racism I received at NVU was when it was a day or two before we were supposed to go on break, our campus break. It was in November, I want to say, and the cafeteria at NVU has a policy where if you're staying on campus, if you're not going home, you can keep your little food containers that you purchase from them, so that way you still have food over break, since the hours of the cafeteria differ. So yeah, basically the hours of the cafeteria differ when it's break, which is understandable because, everybody's home. So in that sense, I'm getting a food container. I'm getting a new food container. I already had one. I put it in the washer, and you get a new one. That's the policy. That's how it works. So I go up to the lady at the front desk, and she saw me walk by to put my container, the one I had first, in the wash. So everyone else, it's what everyone does with a food container. So I'm going up there, and I ask her, can I please have a new container? And she got nasty with me, talking about why should I give it to you? Oh, you're going to keep it clean? Or you're going to mess it up? You're going to break it? Like, just pressing me out for a fucking food container. And I'm like, it's not that serious. You just saw me put it away. Like, you're giving me a hard time for a food container, basically. Just asking me all these unnecessary questions, like, oh, are you going to keep it clean? Oh, are you going to lose it? Things like that. Like, no, this lady has never talked to me ever up until this point. Me and this lady have never had any other prior interaction, never had any issues. This is the very first interaction me and this lady have ever had. And she's pressing me the fuck out over a food container. And then what really pissed me off was when she was like pressing me out. While she's pressing me out for a food container, this white girl comes down, does the exact same thing I did, and is going to interrupt our conversation. It's not even a conversation. She interrupted her pressing me out to ask the exact same thing I asked. So while this lady is pressing me out, this little white girl came up and was like, I'm sorry, I can have a food container. No issue. Unlocks the desk and gets the girl a food container and goes back to pressing me out. So I'm confused at this point. I'm like, so what the fuck? You gonna give her a container and not me for no reason? Now, I think it was in November. So, like, I can't remember if it was a game or practice, but I remember I didn't have, like, time. So, like, I told the lady, like, I need to go. Can I have a food container? Yes or no? Like, at this point, I'm frustrated. I know I had to be somewhere. It was either practice or a game, but I had to be somewhere. So, I pressed her out, like, look, like, yes or no at that point. And she finally just gave me a container. And it's like, you turned a 1 minute interaction to, like, a good 5 minutes. For what? Really, for what? So, that's what I mean by racism in a systematic way. Now, she could have had a prejudice about me. I could have had a prejudice about her. But it becomes racism when you're using race to systematically oppress someone else. If she had it her way, I probably wouldn't have got a food container. But if she was simply prejudiced, she probably would have just looked at me funny. But because of the position that she was in, she was like, nah, she's not getting a food container. And that's what racism is. When you systematically oppress a group of people because it feels good to you. And that was honestly the most difficult thing to discuss about when I was watching the video on MTV and when I was reading the prologue in chapter 1. Because when I was watching the MTV video, a big issue that I saw in there was how college students and white students felt systematically oppressed from getting scholarships. And I personally, I understood where they were coming from, but at the same time, I didn't agree with it. Because even Jose, the person who made the video, even said, it's a 41% difference between a white student and a black student getting a scholarship. So white students are at a 41% higher advantage than us to get scholarships. And that's the statistics, that's the truth. So when white students feel systematically oppressed when they have scholarships specifically for students of color, I personally don't agree that they're systematically oppressed. I did not get any racially motivated scholarships. I did not get any scholarships for being black. All of my scholarships were solely academic. Solely academic. All 5 of my scholarships for my freshman year of college were solely academic and based on academics. So they could have picked anybody. They really could have picked anybody. The real issue that we will not I'm not trying to jump into the issue of college itself, but it needs to be discussed. The real issue is college needs to be affordable to begin with, so no one feels oppressed. The biggest issue is that they don't want to mention is when I applied for all 5 of those scholarships, I had to prove my financial instability. I had to prove that I was in need of financial aid, which I personally don't agree with. You have to type, and I know my college kids know what I'm talking about, you have to pretty much type sob stories to these academic administrations. You have to, like, say, oh, I come from a single parent. Like, literally, this is why I don't want to go down this rabbit hole of the real college issue, but it needs to be discussed to understand this idea that most white students have about scholarships. The real issue is that college is not affordable for anybody unless you come from a wealthy family and that's just how you live. But the problem is you have the FAFSA, where if the parents make a certain amount of threshold, they can't get any financial aid at all. But the threshold itself is so unreasonable. Like if you're living with both parents, or if you have or if you have a single parent with a good job, they're gonna go past the threshold for financial aid, which isn't reasonable. Like if you're a common middle class family, you're not gonna get a lot of financial aid, which I don't think is reasonable because of how expensive college is in itself. That's why you have so many people, regardless of race, who can't afford college. That's the real issue. And yes, they do have scholarships for people of color, but the only reason I personally think they have scholarships specifically for people of color is because we live in a system that's not fair at all. We live in a system where you're more likely to see people of color in these low socioeconomic neighborhoods. We live in a system where you're more likely to see white people in suburban homes in great neighborhoods who, yes, are in need of money because college is so expensive, but they're not struggling on a day-to-day basis. They're not struggling to make ends meet. They're not struggling for food. And that's why I think we need those scholarships. We need those scholarships. You have 400 plus years where white people had the full advantage. And now all of a sudden when black people get something, it's an issue. Which is crazy to me. At the end of the day, college is expensive and it shouldn't be the monopoly that it is. But for white students to say they're feeling oppressed because they can't get any scholarships and they see all these racially motivated scholarships, I personally don't think it's the same thing. It's a competition. That's how I look at it. It's a competition with these scholarships. And I'm not even eligible for every scholarship. So I feel like for a white student to get mad at that, that's bullshit to me. I'm not eligible for every single scholarship. Nobody is. What about the thousands of other scholarships that those students were eligible for? You didn't get any of those, or you didn't apply to any of those? You have to apply for every scholarship that you are eligible for. They got scholarships for left-handed people. Oh, but I feel oppressed because I'm a right-handed person? Like, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing, and it needs to be taken into consideration heavily. The whole college thing is a separate issue, but the racism thing does not correspond with that issue. Because, honestly, it's been 400 plus years, and I think that's what white people fail to remember. I get it. The students I work with, it's not their fault. The teachers I work with, it's not their fault. My coworkers, it's not their fault. I get it. It's not your fault, but it becomes an issue when I will say that racism from 400 years ago to now is not the same. It's not as blatant. That's really the only difference. It's not as blatant, but it's been ingrained to our society and we just don't want to admit it. Now, granted, I'm not on a plantation right now. I'm not being whipped, beaten, and strangled right now. But you do have cases, and we have been doing better at this as time goes, but you still have places where I'm less likely to get a job. I'm less likely to get a scholarship. I'm more likely to be pulled over. I'm more likely to be shot. We still have those more likelies that systematically oppress us. And that's what people don't want to face. That's what the people in the MTV video didn't want to face. That's what people in the book don't want to face. So when the question posed to Tatum on, I didn't know racism was still an issue, it really is. And I think that when Tatum was explaining that white people are in their own bubble, as well as the MTV video, when they explain white people are in their own bubble, they really are. If you're not inflicting racism yourself, you're in this little bubble because you don't experience it for yourself on a daily basis. You may hear about it, but you can't personally relate to it because it's not happening to you. So I think that's the biggest deal with just understanding racism for white people. you can't experience it. You can never experience it. I don't care how much a white person says they're being racially oppressed. There's no way. There's really no way. Unless I'm in a position of power and I'm saying you can't do that because you're white, or I'm not going to hire you because you're white, you're not being racially oppressed. You may be financially oppressed, which is everybody, but you can never truly be racially oppressed. I personally think for the 400 plus years that black people specifically have been struggling in this country, and then the 66 years where we were for ourselves, that needs to be taken into consideration more. And I hate the excuse of, oh, it was so long ago. Yeah, it was so long ago. If it was so long ago, why are we still seeing reminiscence of it? If slavery was so long ago, why are we still acting like black people don't have a chance? If slavery was so long ago, why are we still being oppressed? Like, white people love to say get over it, but then they won't do what it takes to get over it. Black people could get over it if the system was fair. But the system is made for us to fail, just like it was back then. Like, the only difference is y'all got smarter about how to pick us off. That's really the only difference for real. Like, we haven't been segregated. We got segregated in the 50s. Segregation became a thing in the 50s. The 1950s. Like, and it's 2020. So from 1950 to 2020, we've been, trying to get our shit together. But before 1950, there was zero chance for us. Y'all did not care about us at all. And y'all still don't care about us. Because from the 50s to now, think of all the racially motivated violence that has happened from 1950 to now. So as much as white people love to pretend that racism isn't a thing, it still is, because as a country, we can't get our shit together. We're not even supposed to be here. I'm not even supposed to be in this country right now. My grandparents aren't supposed to be in this country right now. My ancestors were not supposed to be in this country. We were dragged here. We were forced here. A lot of people that are here right now are not supposed to be here. And people don't want to see that. They don't want to, be reminded about that. There's going to be fragments of racism everywhere. Me being here right now is an effect of racism. Me being here right now is personally, for me, just a reminder of what colonization is, of what white people did to us. And personally, racism can't really go away until it's taught out of us. It has to be taught out of us. And it can't be taught out of us because the same people that were racially oppressing blacks in the 50s probably are still here. You have people that were inflicting violence on us. You have KKK members. You have all these white people who just blatantly can't stand black people, still alive walking this earth to this day. I can't tell you how many times back home I've seen Confederate flags being waved. In La Plata, Maryland, they wave Confederate flags like it's no issue. Like in North Carolina, they wave Confederate flags. Even here in Virginia, they wave Confederate flags like it's no issue. And that's the people who you have to be careful for. Those are the people that are the reason that racism is still here. I remember when I was up at school in Vermont, me and my teammates saw a Confederate flag. And it's like, what are you doing with the Confederate flag? You're up north. Like, Confederate flags originated from the South. And you have someone living all the way up north, keeping that shit in front of their house. So the argument about it being a Southern thing, I don't agree with. Because what was that flag there for? What's the history behind that flag? What did people do in the name of that flag? And that's what people don't want to talk about. They don't want to have the hard conversations. That yes, I'm not shackled in chains right now, but systematically, there's people that would kill me if they had the chance. And that's what racism is. And that's what I took from the book. That's what I took from the video. And I personally think that if we truly want racism to go away, we can't ingrain what our racist grandparents and great-grandparents instill in us. And we have to be able to be more compassionate and think for ourselves. We have to teach our children better. We have to teach our students better. The people in power now need to change policies. In order to stop systematically oppressing us, the system needs to be fair. It needs to be equitable. And people don't want to do that because they're not going to benefit from it. The reason the system is how it is because it's the people up top, the white people, that are the 1%, to be specific, that are benefiting from all this shit. That's why they still want us at the bottom. That's why we don't have a chance. The people up top that make these school policies, these political policies, shit, the president, they don't care about people that look like me. They don't care about people that look like me at all. So until we get people up in office that do care about people like me, whether what color they are, it's not going to be a difference. And that's all I got to say about that. So, thank you, Rob. Thank you for your time. Have a good one.